First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Peter Danielson to give Amsterdam Smart City the opportunity to actually not only share its best practices, but also its lessons learned. And I'd like to congratulate Soraya, Kirsten and her team on putting together such a great conference with such a great turnout. And in the end, it's all about the people. It's the engagement of the people. And that's why it's so important to have you all here. By starting off, I'd like to have a little bit of a feel of the people in the audience who consider themselves to come from a smart city. Luckily, the mayor puts up his hand. So let's assume there's 500 people in this audience and only 10% puts up their hands. Does that mean that 90% of the audience come from dumb cities? And this is the whole issue about smart cities. It's such a container definition. If you look up the definition smart city on Google, you will come up over 320 definitions. And actually it was invented by IBM because they wanted to have an order from the city of Rio de Janeiro. And they thought, oh, in 1998, let's invent a new word called smart city. So I think it's important that you actually focus on cities. If you do these things on a national level, then you will have this top-down approach, which in our experience, it doesn't work. And just take this lovely city. This has been around, if you look up on Wikipedia, the first settlements were over 1,000 years ago. And the Kingdom of Sweden is only several hundred years. So countries are just coming by and passing by. So that's why it's important to establish the whole innovation cycle within smart cities. As Mr. Kiriilioski, I hope I pronounced your name right, already mentioned, it's crucial to take these Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations very, very seriously, and especially when we focus on number 11, the sustainable city and communities. And it's all about collaboration, and it's about to coordinate adherence to common standards to ensure openness and transparency and interoperability. The next little movie will show you why and how we became the European Capital of Innovation in 2016.
I is for individual, and Amsterdam represents the collective. Together, all these I's make up the city, where they also support and promote it.
This is ours, how can we act upon it?
Why buy if you can borrow for free?
Amsterdam is key for our success, and we're proud to be a part of it.
65 developers and designers are working on smart solutions for the city, for the arena. They've got 48 hours.
In this project we use the Smart Citizen Kit, which is an open source, low-cost sensor kit.
Thank you. So, and one of the reasons that was mentioned in the jury report we won the European Capital of Innovation was, it was called the Amsterdam approach, which is learning by doing. If you fail, fail quickly, fail cheaply, but create that environment within your organization to allow for failure. And it's especially another key issue to allow for uncertainty, because we do not know what's going to happen in the next year, in the next 10 years, whether if it's on an economical front or a technical front or maybe on a global front. In 2008, we started off with a definition on smart cities. How can we combine electricity and connectivity to reduce CO2 emissions? That definition has evolved over the last 11 years. So now it's all about the livability of the city, of the happiness of the citizens. And one of the imperatives you need for a smart city, and I think your mayor and his team are a great example. He called it crazy, but I would say, I would more like to call it the focused maverick. Just think outside of the box, think what's already there. How can you tweak those little projects to actually label them smart and improve the quality of life of the citizens? Now we focus less on technology. Technology and ICT are the enablers for a smart city, but we focus much more on digital transformation, social inclusion. And I mentioned to you, I'm going to share some lessons learned, but when we started off in 2008, we were talking about cars reducing CO2 emission, but we actually forgot about the people that could afford a car. So make it on a non-discriminatory basis, make sure that everything you do is accessible and for everyone in your municipality. Another crazy thing is that a lot of people, willingly or not willingly, are actually sharing their data with Google, with Facebook, and other social media platforms. But they do not share their data with the local government. How can we re-establish that trust that also citizens are willing to share their data with their local government? Last, we're focusing a lot now on ethics. We think as a local government, you have to make sure that you do everything on a non-discriminatory basis. Algorithms are written by people. Make sure that there's enough ethics in those algorithms. And one of the things we do now is having ethical audits on algorithms. Is the algorithm actually doing what we think it is doing? And this also comes to autonomous vehicles. The former president of the United States, Barack Obama, was in an autonomous vehicle. Suddenly, a toddler crosses the road, a child crosses the road. What is the machine going to decide? Is it going to save the life of the child, or is it going to save the life of the former president of the United States? With the current president of the United States, I think what the machine should decide. Personal opinion, not the opinion of the city of Amsterdam. As I mentioned, residents have to be central. Do you hear the same noise as I do? Can we switch off the football or soccer or rugby or cricket or ice hockey or... No, apparently not. Okay, let's not so allow for intervenience and allow for disruption. Resident central, so everything you do, take that central point, make it citizen-centric, because in the end, they are your customers. If they do not take your solution, then it's not going to work. Learning by doing, as I mentioned, public values. We talked a lot about open data, but we transformed that definition and discussion into public data. That's slightly different, but it's really, really important. How can we ensure that the data that are stored in this database of a city, that we can actually use that. And there's a trend now in Amsterdam to collect less and less and less data of the citizens, but only to collect the necessary data that we need. Conditions and regulations, a lot of times there's people will say, oh, we can't do that because of the regulations and the regulator. Invite these guys in from the very early stage and let them discuss with you how you can actually make that project happen, and ask, if necessary, for a temporary regulatory holiday. Public-private partnerships are really important. These days, knowledge institutions, universities are really, really important, and NGOs become a much, much more important role. And everything you do, do it open and transparent. Even your failures, share those with your community. This is just a snapshot of the strategic partners. We have over 300 partners in all different projects, but these are the strategic partners. And I'd like to focus on the top left, which are the citizens' engagement institutions in Amsterdam. They enable the discussion with the conversation with the people that are living in Amsterdam, working in Amsterdam. So for example, Pakhuis de Zwijger, they're a commercial conference venue. They organize debates commercially during daytime, but at nighttime, they open up their space and program all kind of topics that may be of interest of the people of Amsterdam, of the municipality, of the companies, and to make sure you have that conversation with the citizens, the vice mayors, the aldermen. They have the obligation to go there at least once a week and sit there and express their opinion, listen and discuss. I slightly disagree with the earlier comment of the mayor that you need a strategy, etc., and a big document. I think that's good if you're a consultancy company and you can earn a lot of money on there. But basically, it is just stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. Do things. You need that vision, so you need that political leadership of a mayor. But start doing things. Stop talking all the time. I mentioned the Citizens Engagement Organization. Another one of that Citizens Engagement Organization is De Waag. And they actually facilitate all kind of technical innovations and make that available for the citizens. On the bottom right, there was a group of people that thought that their air pollution went down and was increasingly getting bad. And instead of putting up sensors yourself as a local government, we asked these people to come in to De Waag, invited a few technical students from the technical university, and they built together their own sensor. And one person was interested in noise, the other one was in CO2 pollution, the other one in NOx pollution, so they could actually build their own sensor. And with inviting them, you solve usually half of the problem. And in the end, they all measured themselves that there was no increase of air pollution. So that's one of the ways we try to re-establish the trust between the governments. Oh, you can reduce that sound, thank you. Another important thing is that you put living labs into your city. In the beginning, we had only 3 dedicated areas within the city of Amsterdam to have as living labs. But then there was this project that said, okay, we need a space, and it didn't fit in those one out of 3 areas. So we couldn't do that project. And at that time we thought, okay, let's make the whole city a living lab. The former marine establishment in Amsterdam is now one of these living labs, which in a closed environment we can experiment with sensors, with beacons, with autonomous vehicles. And for those of you who visited Amsterdam, there's a lot of water, so we now experiment with autonomous boats. And what we would like to do is the canals were made in the past just for transportation, for inner city distribution, and we would like to re-establish that, that role. So together with MIT in Massachusetts, a technical university in Delft, and the University of Wageningen, we created robots, autonomous boats, GPS, LiDAR. They're constantly scanning the environment, learning, and collateral benefit, what we couldn't think of, is that if you put these things in a row, they suddenly become temporary infrastructure. So what you can see there is that as soon as a boat arrives that would like to pass, automatically these rowboats make space, and when the boat has passed, as you can see on the example in the middle there, then they come back and etc. So we experiment now with collecting waste within the city center with these autonomous boats, but also tourists. They can actually go around in those autonomous boats, which is much safer than all the pedal boats we have and all the tourist boats going around. Another thing is, I'm not a big fan of putting a solution out there and ask then the huge companies to do a tender or a procurement. So from that point of view, we set up a program called Startup in Residence. It's a training program of 6 months. We have topics defined by the City of Amsterdam. We invite startups in to help to redefine, to fine-tune the problem and help them and let the startups help us to find a solution for it. One of the lessons learned there is the first cycle, we only opened up the Startup in Residence program for Amsterdam startups, where we do great things, but there's a million better things out there in the world. So we opened it up to the whole world. Another lesson learned there is we didn't have, in the first cycle, any money available for a first prototype. So a startup came up with a great solution, but we didn't have actually money to help them to build that first prototype. One of the things we also figured out is the language of startups is slightly different than the language that civil servants speak. No offense in that right corner. So we had to make a dictionary that if somebody from a startup says A, that means B in civil servant language. And this is another thing we learned, that it's really important to align the interests and to align the solutions. It's important that if you go on the smart city journey, that you approach things from a holistic point of view. So it's not a departmental thing, it's not an energy thing, it's not a transportation issue, it's not a waste issue, but try to approach the things on a cross-silo base or a holistic base. So one of the things we did is the vehicle-to-grid principle. We acknowledged that electrical vehicles are not only a mode of transportation, but are also storage of energy. So we built electrical charging points within the public space that could not only deliver electricity to the vehicle, but also, if necessary, the energy that's stored in the car can be put back into the grid. And you have to make all kind of platforms to trade that energy. But this is the first part that we think that the whole city needs to be, has to have a bidirectional electricity grid. And that it's not always a matter of technique is probably this example. Mobility as a service in the Zuidas. Zuidas is the central business district of the city of Amsterdam. We started off by asking 100 people to leave their lease car in the parking garage for 1 month. We gave them €1,000 in return to use different modalities of transportation. And what you see is that people are starting to use car sharing, they start to use biking, they start to use public transportation, Uber, and all kind of other things that you have to some kind of force or force them to get out of that car to think on new ways of transportation. One of the things we learned there is that the car was missed most during the evening hours when there's less public transportation available, and lease car was missed most during the weekend to go grocery shopping or to go to the grandparents. And that was not the purpose people were getting a lease car. So we started off by learning from that experiment. We're doing it now on 1,000 owners of lease cars, and actually people are starting to get rid of their lease car, and even companies start to realize that it's cheaper to give people money to use different modalities of transportation than actually provide them with a lease car. As I mentioned, data are really, really important. Everything we basically do is data-driven. So if we face with a problem, we start to look into the data. How can we actually use the data that is stored within the city of Amsterdam? And bear in mind, the city doesn't own data. The data are owned by the citizens. And the city is just a storeroom, a data warehouse of these data. So if you store those data, make sure you make it transparent which data you store. If you collect data via sensors or cameras, make it transparent what data you are collecting. What are you doing with the data? What's the output of the data? And make it as accessible as possible. Of course, you can open up your data and put them in data sets, but if you can't access them as a citizen, then it's basically useless for the citizens' engagement. Another thing we did there is we signed a Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. Let me just go one back. The Cities Coalition for Digital Rights was signed last year by the City of New York, the City of Barcelona and the City of Amsterdam, as we truly believe that digital rights are human rights. And we truly believe that people should have the ability to be digitally forgotten. To give an example there, when I was a student, I got my first mobile phone and I forgot to pay one of the installments of my mobile phone. 20 years later, it costed me 1% extra when I wanted to get my mortgage because I was not trustworthy enough. So make sure that people can actually be digitally forgotten. Waste. I had the privilege to be here in May and be part of a workshop on design thinking, on smart city. And there was one person in the room who had a passion for waste, but especially a passion to reduce waste, and how can we make the city a zero waste city, as was mentioned earlier. So what we try to do now is artificial intelligence, learning, machine learning, to actually scan the environment. What type of waste is there? How much waste is there? Is it placed legally or illegally? And that helps to improve the whole efficiency of collecting the waste in the city of Amsterdam. We have a lot of underground waste bins, and we put sensors in there. So if, when a certain waste bin reached a certain level, then it would give an indication that it needed to be emptied. We figured out after 3 months that the amount of kilometers that the waste collection vans were driving was actually more than when they do just their regular collection. So that's one of the things we learned there. We have this waste to power plant, and they produce so much energy that it's enough for the public transportation and public lighting. I need to speed up. Everything, the lessons learned. Maybe share the greatest lesson learned we did in the past. That was selling Manhattan to the British. After that, we had the golden age, and we learned a lot from that because the golden age was only prosperous for only the rich people in the city of Amsterdam, and we forgot about the poor people. So that was the lesson learned. As I mentioned, there's a lot of failures. There's a lot of projects that didn't scale. Throw them away? No, put them somewhere. And we created something called an innovation graveyard. Put the projects there, reassess them every 6 months, and 9 out of 10, when you combine 3 or 4 projects now that weren't ready to scale, they suddenly are ready to scale. Really important, it's about ecosystems and not about ego systems. If you acknowledge that, then that's half of the way forward. For Amsterdam, it worked to have a special purpose vehicle, to be independent, learning by doing. And bear in mind that if technology is the answer, what was the question? Because it's a much deeper underlying issue usually going around. You see all those dots on the screens at the side. They're all individually now. So let's make them connecting dots. They're already moving a bit, so that's a good thing. But let's connect those dots and put everything in place to make Helsingborg a more livable place for the people who work, live and play here. That hopefully will result soon that the mayor of Helsingborg can receive the award of the European Commission to be the European Capital of Innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Let me start by apologizing. I assure you, or the mastermind who sits up there assures you we weren't hacked, it was human error. But I think it's fascinating that human error comes in and gave us a bit of music and then a hockey game of sorts.
Yeah.
Just to test you a little. Which bridges me over. Mr. Mayor, please cover your ears. Is it good with some healthy competition between cities?
Oh yes, if there's a monopoly, there's no innovation. So please have competition and learn from each other, because things that fail in other cities may be very, very useful in certain cities. So have that competition and try to win from each other, but most importantly, try to learn from each other.
You talked about happiness and well-being, and I think it's important to put that in context to what you were saying also about the potential unfairness and inequalities of that are stampeding and not moving in the right direction. When it comes to city and technology, how is Amsterdam thinking about closing the gaps and making it a city for everyone?
We have 180 different nationalities, different backgrounds, different religious background, different cultural background. So we realize there's no one size fits all. And actually people are not living in a city, but people are living in a neighborhood. So you have to start off on a neighborhood level, tailored made, ask them what the problems are, and engage those citizens in that neighborhood to actually come up with solutions that will improve the quality of life. And the city center of Amsterdam has a completely different demographics than the southeast of Amsterdam. So if you would do that from a top-down approach, and you say in the city everyone has to have fiber, there's people in the southeast of Amsterdam, they don't want fiber, they just want a proper 4G connection. So it's different perspectives, different expectations, so make it as tailor-made to the citizens that are involved in those areas.
I completely agree with you. I think it's worth thinking about as well that there's some cynicism around what we're discussing here today. Absolutely. And the people in the room are bought into what we want to do, and we're also one of the few privileged ones are the ones sitting here today. And we know that there is a political unrest in Europe and globally. But how do you as a city address that cynicism, which can be quite brutal and raw in social media?
That's one of the things. It's about re-establishing that trust as well for the citizens, and actually be transparent and open and show what it can actually do for a city, how it can improve their quality of life. And this is the phases of Schopenhauer, the philosopher in the last or the previous century, that says, first of all, everything is ridiculized. Oh, it's funny. Oh, we don't need that. Then it's heavily opposed. That's the next step. And then the third phase is always, I've always told you that we should do it this way. So the cynicism, you have to overcome the cynicism, but you have to explain and constantly explain and engage that citizen and having that discussion with the citizens. And a one-off survey is not citizens' engagement. You have to constantly talk to your citizens.
I don't know what you guys felt, but I feel a huge encouragement that the citicism is actually part of the process, and therefore welcoming the rawness of the debate right now as part of coming out on the other end. You were talking about digital data and the human rights side of owning data. You as a city, how do you deal with the corporate side of owning data?
We encourage and we embrace the large companies to come into the city. We work together with Google and TomTom and Facebook and the mobile telephone operators, especially when it comes to crowd control. But the collaboration using the data from Google. Google can use the data from the city of Amsterdam because it's open data and it's public data. So together with Google and TomTom and the data of the city of Amsterdam, we now developed a model that you can actually drive around and find a parking space that the application will tell you with a probability of around 90% if there's a parking space free on a stretch of 100 meters. And bear in mind that driving around in a city center, looking for a parking space is actually the biggest source of consumer CO2 emission. So embrace the collaboration with these big companies. When we started off on working with Google, Google came up with one box of A4, that's your contract. We said, thank you very much. We're going to draft our own contract. So make sure you're in the lead. And it's a bit cynical, actually, that the whole data discussion is driven at the moment by the corporates, and that governments and local governments are actually behind. And we need to take that new role. We need to take that role and be in the lead of that whole data discussion.
We've taken the leap from Helsingborg to Amsterdam, and I'm going to ask you to take us to the leap globally. What is the European competitive advantage when it comes to data and data sharing, but also the smarter city?
Of course, you have the situation in PRC, in the People's Republic of China, which is a completely different one. Facial recognition is used for things that we're probably not completely in favor of that. The Americans are not much better, but they don't tell what they're doing. So if you have Huawei toolboxes or you have Cisco toolboxes, both governments are looking into those boxes and actually monitoring what you are doing. I think in Europe, personal opinion is that we lacked to invest in innovation, and that's why we are becoming dependent on either electronics from PRC or from the US. So I think there should be a huge investment program on innovation, preferably on the European level, to get us back into the lead when it comes to innovation and also with data treatment.
Thank you for sharing.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you.